Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Singapore FinTech Association's launch of our Cyber Risk Subcommittee. In recent times, especially the last few months, cyber attacks, data breaches, and cyber risk issues have grown exponentially due to the need for people to work virtually due to COVID-19. We are therefore pleased to launch our Cyber Risk Subcommittee today, starting off with an opening by SFA President, Mr. Chia Hock Lai. Hock Lai, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to join all of you in today's event on the launch of the Cyber Risk Subcommittee. First of all, a big congrats to the launch of the Cyber Risk Subcommittee led by Michael. I'll keep my opening speech short. COVID-19, some call it as the crisis of our generation, has also accelerated digital adoption of all kinds by consumers of all ages and businesses of all sizes. Inadvertently, it also attracts bad actors of all kinds. We see rising cyber risk incidents from massive data leaks and online scams. In particular, for fintech, it's more complex because fintech services frequently entails the use of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing, distributed ledger or blockchain, and Internet of Things, which presents new paradigms in cyber defense. For example, when we talk about AI systems, we have to look at data poisoning and adversarial attacks. And for Internet of Things, we have to look at how to enable cyber defense at scale. So I think it's timely for the Cyber Risk Subcommittee to be formed, and I think they might have to focus on the following three areas. First, awareness, because it's commonly known, usually the weakest link is the human link. So providing awareness to consumers and businesses on the various cyber risk areas are important. Second is the adoption of standards and frameworks if they are available. And if they are not available, I think the committee might have to look at creating new standards. Third is on advocacy, to advocate for the interest of the industry players and through active engagement with key stakeholders like regulators and even fintech companies. Let me conclude. I think 1 out of 4 or 5 tech startups in Singapore are fintech startups. 4 out of every 5 fintech companies in Singapore are SFA members. 1 out of every 5 countries in the world SFA has a strategic partnership with. I hope that the subcommittee can leverage on the larger platform of SFA to perform their awareness adoption and advocacy roles more effectively. With that, I wish everyone a pleasant evening ahead. Thank you. Let me hand over the mic to Michael. Thanks.
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. Can everyone see the slides that I'm sharing? Yeah. All right. Thanks, Hock Lai. Yeah, for the rest of you might be wondering why all of us, all the speakers and also the moderators, we are all called Daphne, and we all have a different variation of the same picture. So the reason why we are doing this is we just want to show you, it's a demonstration on how easy it is for online impersonation, especially when you are talking on a social media or a web platform such as this. All you need to do is to just change the photo and your name, and that's it, and you could somewhat get away with being a different person, all right? So we'll go into that later, but right now, I would like to share more on the topic, a short topic that I'd like to talk about, which is the changing landscape of cybersecurity, or rather cyber risk in this sense, right? Okay, so the first slide that I want to share, this is a recent source from the World Economic Forum, and this is post the COVID outbreak, and more importantly, this report, or rather this mapping, came after the whole what you call that, the lockdown. So in various countries, especially in Singapore, we call it the circuit breaker. So there is a lockdown period for most countries, and this is where they have concluded that this top 10 most worrisome risks for your company. So what's really interesting in this diagram is that, as you can see, cyber attack and data fraud due to a sustained shift in working patterns is in the top 3 of the most worrisome risks for companies, not just in Singapore, but around the world. So in fact, it is even higher, it's a higher risk than another global outbreak of COVID or different infectious disease. So this is significant to me because post-COVID period, cyber security or cyber risks are there, but I feel that because of the COVID situation, and more importantly, because of the swift in terms of working patterns. So what they mean here is that organizations were rushing to move their employees to work from home, before or during the lockdown period. But a lot of employees or organizations are not ready for it, because when you work for an organization, especially the large firm, as long as your laptop is plugged onto the environment, all the security policies and all the hardware and firewalls will kick in, will take effect. But as soon as you go home, there's a lot of things that is out of control. You could be using the same computers that you share with your parents or with your child, or you could download games and watch Netflix. So there are various security risks that are involved in working from home, and because of that, that becomes a very high priority, and cyber attacks has been prevalent because of it. So that's a more macro view of cyber risks around the world, and why it's becoming very important in times like this. So I would like to have a more micro view of back in Singapore. So cyber risk again is not new in Singapore, because over the years, especially when we first introduced the Personal Data Protection Act in 2012, all organizations, whether big or small, understand that there is an obligation in terms of the use of personal data of their clients, and especially when it comes to fintech businesses, which most of the time you deal with online, digital data, and also online marketplace. So as such, there will definitely be some level of usage of personal data or transfer of personal data. So we have to take into account that this Personal Data Protection Act has been enforced for the last couple of years. And in fact, as you see, the number of data breaches were on the rise as well. So there are some high profile data breaches. And you would think, some of the larger companies they would have invested, I suppose, millions of dollars into it, but yet they are still vulnerable. So what more the smaller setup that could have potentially a limited budget for such endeavors, right? So next, as you see in Singapore, we also have the Technology Risk Management Notice by MAS. MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, for those participants who are from abroad. So this is a more holistic technology risk framework for the bank, for financial institutions, and there is they touch on topics such as the cloud use, secure usage of cloud, and also cyber security. But what's interesting that you can see over the years, MAS has issued notice or circular which is more targeted. For example, in the circular of 2015, there is actually a technology risk and cyber security training for the board members, because MAS recognized the importance of the awareness, as mentioned by Hotline. Awareness is always the starting point, and in fact, the awareness needs to go straight to the top. So in this case, the board of directors should be the first point of contact to have a certain level of competency and awareness in order to spread throughout the organization that there's this sort of mindfulness of cybersecurity management, right? And then later on, as you can see last year, there's a notice from MAS again on cyber hygiene. And again, for the same reason, it's sort of a targeted notice on this area of ensuring financial institution and bank that has a certain baseline cyber hygiene practice across the industry. And the most recent one, and again, this is not stopping because cyber risk is something that is flowing. So this year, MAS has issued a consultation paper, and it's a notice on identity verification. So that brings us very nicely later on into our first topic on the online impersonation, and the little demonstration that we are doing here to show that how easy it is to impersonate someone online. Right? So finally, I would like to share some cyber risk trends in the coming year. We're already approaching year end. So I think whatever that we want to plan, it should be for the coming year. So these are some of the trends that we should look at and also start planning for it. So remote working is here to stay. I think a lot of people will agree that it will be the new normal. So even if we could return back to the office, there will still be some colleagues that will be working from home. So this is one area that we need to realize that it will heighten exposure, and we will need to manage the cyber risk in the area of working from home or remote working, right? So as what we also shared before this is that the regulatory exposure will be increasing around the world. So not just in Singapore, but it will be around the world. And especially if you are involved in international business, which most of us are or want to, then there's another area that you need to look in, because when you transmit or you have commerce around the world, you need to understand the other regulatory exposures in terms of the cyber risk as well. Right? So the third factor is ransomware. Yes, so ransomware is definitely prevalent, and it's going to be more frequent and financially damaging as well. Because during this period of COVID, in fact, I was told that a lot of computers or company laptops were compromised. So we do not know the extent of the damage, of the financial damage, because some of this malwares or ransomwares or trojans are already in the system. So it has not taken effect yet. So in the next 6 to 9 months, you will see more of this incidents that is being reported. And of course, there are a lot of incidents which are not reported as well. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. Then, of course, the next trend that we see is a business compromised email. So that's another topic that we will be touching about, or rather we're going deeper into in our webinar, which is the email phishing. And I think that's a very important topic, because while it sounds like something that is common, it is also a lot of things that we can do around it to ensure that the organization is safe against email attacks. Then, of course, there will be higher costs in terms of mega data breaches. So this is something that intrigues me. Every time you look into the news, there are always big news about data breaches. But after a while, there will be bigger news. So if you have X company leak with a million leakage of million data, then a few days later there will be even larger data breaches. So of course, this is worrying, but yet I think it's something that will continue to go on until the market has reached a certain level of cyber risk awareness and competency. So the other things that we are looking at is, the external attack will cause the most expensive loss. So yes, a lot of times organizations are protecting against external attack with all the cybersecurity solutions and services. But it's interesting to note that the internal incident or accident is also going to occur more frequently. So what does that mean? Sometimes the cyber attack happens is because of the employee or your internal staff not doing something that they should, or clicking something that they shouldn't, right? And then that causes breach incidents as well. So that's the part where the awareness and training can really help, because if your employees, which is your first line of defense, are competent in terms of handling this cyber threat, then a lot of incidents could be avoided. Yeah. And of course, the final point is that cyber claims will be growing in numbers and complexity as well. Yeah. So finally, I'd just like to touch about the Cyber Risk Committee. I think Hok Lai has mentioned this as well. So we do have our vision, and I think it's very timely as well for us to set up this SFA Cyber Risk Subcommittee, because we want to touch on the most important part, which is to first create the awareness of potential financial losses that results from cyber attack or data breach that involves the financial service sector. So that's your fintech firms, your FIs, and of course the banks as well, right? And then the second main vision is to also foster collaboration and knowledge sharing between fintech startups, regulators, companies, and also participants in the ecosystem. So the ecosystem that we are in right now is the cyber security and data protection ecosystem. And our mission is to engage with regulators, to engage with industry. Of course, talent development and training is very important. And more importantly, to also nurture companies in the ecosystem so that the cybersecurity and data protection type of business can interact with fintechs. And then, as mentioned by Hok Lai, to come up with standards that or best practices that suits our local industry as well. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. So next, I would like to introduce our panelists for the webinar. So the first panelist I'd like to introduce is Mr. Kenny Lee. Kenny has been a longtime friend of mine, and he's also a practitioner in cybersecurity. And now he is the managing director of OSL. It's the leading digital asset platform. So Kenny. So, okay. So, well, Kenny, do you want to share a bit about your experience of being Daphne?
Yeah, it was when we first put the panel together, I was commenting on how good looking we all of us are. So yeah, it's fun being Daphne, and I look forward to being back to myself.
Thank you. Thanks, Kenny. So next, I'd like to introduce Paul. Paul is the CEO and co-founder of Horangi. So Horangi is a forward-looking and innovative cybersecurity service firm. So hi, Paul.
Michael, thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you. So, and next, we'd like to introduce Heng. Heng is the co-founder of Group 8. So Group 8 is a cybersecurity and cyber intelligence firm with AI-driven solutions. Hello, Heng.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. And so finally, last but not least, I would like to introduce the real Daphne, our moderator, which is Daphne Ng. She's the director and co-founder of Didoco, and she's our serial entrepreneur and multi-talented moderator for the day. So over to you, Daphne.
Hi, thanks. I'm Hok Lai. Thanks, Michael. And I'm Daphne. I also sit on the board of SFA Exco, and we're really excited today to share on a few topics. The first one being impersonation. It's total disaster to see myself 5 times on the screen. But it seems that you are all yeah. So in terms of impersonation, wanted to ask you guys, a lot relating to like KYC, relating to account opening. Do you think like the current state of technology is able to kind of overcome at least this impersonation point itself? Maybe Heng or Michael, you can start first on that.
Yeah, I'd like to start. I mean, currently, I think all of us have experience, especially during this time, to do online verification. So one of the personal experience I have when I onboard with a financial institution is we have to do a video call with the officer in charge. But the challenge is you have to also show your IC, so I'm sure this is an experience that someone has done before. So it's actually very difficult to be able to fit your face and the IC, your national identity card, with, of course, readable or legible details onto the same frame. So we were sort of really spending a lot of time just to get that right. So I feel that sometimes when you come with this kind of policy, it makes sense on paper, but when it comes to the practicality, it could have challenges in the real world situation as well.
Have you seen any technologies, Heng, relating to this that it's have been proven useful?
Yeah, I think a lot of, for example, of fintech, cryptocurrency, and payment companies have been using a liveness solution. So you record a video of yourself live, like maybe showing ID, turning around, or like a few seconds, to verify that you're not being forced to do it, or like your identity is stolen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean, coming to that point, because all this with the COVID situation that happened, the lockdown, we're talking about remote selling. On top of remote selling, we are also talking about work from home. And then there was a couple of questions relating to that. How can companies safeguard in terms of policy processes, or using the type of technology in terms of work from home data breaches? So it's also relating to a lot of use of cloud computing now as well. So Paul, what do you think relating to work from home data breaches? How can companies better safeguard that?
Yeah, I think like the transition to the cloud and actually like the new normal with working from home, brings some new challenges for security teams and organizations alike. I think a lot of that comes from training, because as Michael was saying in his opening talk, it's a very different environment than what we're used to in working in our, especially if you work at a large organization's network. So I think those challenges, can never be fully mitigated, but oftentimes training is one of the best solutions, and something that is very important too if your company's transitioning to a lot of SaaS software at the same time, or transitioning from an on-prem environment to the cloud. I think, they also, if they're an engineering company in relation to fintechs, some of the best things you can do is like integrating automation, right? So whether that's kind of like what Harangi does with the cloud security posture management, or automating your DevSecOps pipeline, there's plenty of things that you can do on that front to kind of build security into your development lifecycle, which ultimately is going to get you a lot further than testing at the front or the end of it. And yeah, I think just general understanding of the cloud and how SaaS companies do security is also important, and what is the difference between what's their responsibility and what's your responsibility as the end user or the organization utilizing their product. So making sure that you have a good understanding of the shared responsibility model with your CSP. So understanding which pieces of security you're responsible for, your organization is responsible for, as well as what they're responsible for, and definitely investing more in, of course, what you're responsible for in mitigating those risks as much as possible. But I think ultimately that the benefits of the cloud definitely outweigh the negative, and I think I'm sure AWS and GCP can, and as well as the other cloud providers can comment on this, but I'm sure their revenues are shooting up right now.
But in general, on average, if I were a startup, fintech company, is there a difference in terms of investment costs? Because that would always be the question, right? How much do I invest in terms of security?
Yeah.
And it outweighs the benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my advice, and I think ultimately this is free outside of the time element, is like setting a security culture as soon as you can. So if you're starting a company, making sure you're thinking about security from the beginning. It's a lot harder to implement when you're like 50, 100, thousands of people, because it becomes much more of a nuisance then. So if you start thinking about security from the bottom up when you start your company, ingrain that culture in the founders, and then subsequently all of the initial members, like you're gonna have a lot easier time. And a lot of the solutions that can be implemented are more around people and process than anything else. Technology is really just a piece of solving the problem. So if you invest a lot in the people and the process early on, that'll help you scale the security challenges and kind of minimize spend in the long run. Where I see people spending a lot of money is like when something bad happens, and then they're kind of catch up, right? That's like, I think, when the biggest budgetary sort of time comes in, and like I think there's plenty of options to cover your downside, especially at an early stage, like cyber insurance, which is relatively cheap and provides coverage for you in case something does happen. So highly recommend that to small businesses. And like I think in the cloud, there's plenty of solutions out there that are reasonably priced based upon usage, which ultimately can scale with your business, that are options that do make sense, and ultimately like why I think the cloud is kind of the future in the space, because it does give a company a lot of capabilities very easily, and that includes security and development capabilities.
So investing at the right timing in terms of people, processes, as well as systems, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think you should invest in people and process right away, and then the systems can come later on.
Yeah, I mean, like on a similar note, I can just open this up to all of you. It's about email phishing. So of course, we observe an increase in phishing attacks this year. Any insights on this? I was talking to a director of a company, and he's talking about how he experienced it firsthand, where a email phishing was actually received by his financial controller to release money. Yeah, any insights on the increase, the surgeons on that? Kenny, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think like how I mentioned, in a post-COVID environment where you don't not actually interacting with your colleagues and employees on a regular basis, it's a prime and a ripe opportunity for people to spearfish or fish for information. And all this information is available online. People's contacts, where they're located, and to send messages or impersonate messages to key individuals, it's super easy right now. You have all this information. You can simply send an email, and I said, I can't be contacted. I don't want to see you face to face. Just give me your password, and I'll be on my way. And it seems like in a very post-COVID environment that just to be productive, just give me the information and let me move on my way. And you don't think about it, but it is ripe for phishing right now.
And Heng, so how do we protect ourselves as a company or as fintech company? You do a lot of work around this, right?
Yeah, so yeah, we have some experiences around like phishing. Like Kenny, to add on to what Kenny said, we see an increase in voice-based phishing, targeted attacks against senior executives or decision makers. How do you protect yourself as a company? I think there's a few things you can do. You can actually check your email carefully, especially anything that requires additional privileges. You want to verify via another communication method like a phone call. Let's say someone asks you to send funds, or there's a change in bank account details, ask for a password, ask for information. And also like what the police force and cybersecurity agency has iterated in their public campaigns, never ever share your one-time passwords or two-factor authentication outputs with anyone else other than the actual platform you're using. And I think one should never ever try to click on any links that come to you via SMS or from unknown emails. Yeah, that's the basic fundamentals.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to add on that, Daphne. I think one method I find that's very effective that we help our clients to do is actually to do a simulated email phishing exercise, right? So we told them that we will actually send the phishing email to all the employees to see what's the hit rate. So surprisingly, one of the exercises we did is 100%. That means 100% fail. Everyone actually clicked on it. So it's that good in terms of the email phishing, but it's also very effective. It's a strong message because the employee doesn't know what they don't know. So you can keep telling them to be careful, and there's a lot of scam out there, but if they've not dealt with it or experienced it firsthand, of course, fortunately, it's in a simulated environment, so no data is lost, and no animal was harmed in the process. I'm just joking. But the fact is, when you do a simulation, right, or exercise such as that, I think that actually gives the employees and also the management as well, they understand the severity of this, that it's actually a lot easier, like what Kenny was saying, it's actually a lot easier than you think, and even your smartest brains behind the computer could also fall for what seemingly innocent phishing attack.
Yeah, but so what would be a good way to kind of validate the identity? Because this is also branching out on the impersonation topic, right? So of course, like if we're talking about like some of the work I do on document management, where we verify with digital signing for identity. So how do we circumvent that based on all you guys' experience in this work?
I can comment. I think generally that's like a process, right? So a lot of most organizations these days, for payments above X amount, they will have to where two people need to sign off, for example, or two people even need to enter and approve of the payment before it goes out. I mean, one of the best ways is just to call them. Obviously, like there's ways that you could be phished through that as well, but ultimately, if you have their number saved, that's a good way to check. And if you're like, oh, did you ask me to send this payment? And they're like, what are you talking about? Obviously, that doesn't work. But really, I think that's a simple process that a lot of organizations still don't have, which is basically it's similar to two-factor authentication, but you just need two people to sign off on payments. You can range it based upon like your business and what your risk level is, of course, and kind of change it based upon the speed that you need to address payments of X size. But generally, like I think process is a good way of eliminating that specific case. It helps with most phishing cases as well, but of course, not everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not just for traditional fiat currency in terms of that. I mean, Bitcoin prices, I don't know, it's like USD 19,000 today. So it's also a digital asset that is being targeted as well. And I hope like Kenny can shed more light on that. You know, with the prices skyrocketing, you know, do we see, I mean, how can users better protect our digital holdings?
Well, definitely, first of all, it warms my heart that you're watching the crypto markets. It's at eye-watering levels, and everyone's so surprised that it hit this level. But I guess it's one of those things where we're all recognizing that our digital wealth is increasing in value, whether it's a stock market that is going through multiples, whether it's just transactions or banking that's occurring online, or it's whether your cryptocurrencies exploding in value. All of your digital wealth is now increasing in value. And at the same time, your digital footprint is cast wider and wider. What does that mean? Whether it's using social media, whether it's LinkedIn or platforms that were spreading more information, personal information about yourself, you combine the two, personal information about yourself that's spread more and more, and your value is worth more and more. You put it together, and this is prime time, prime time for the thieves out there. And I'll say, even for someone like yourself, Davi, you're a public figure. I'll say most public figures are at higher risk because your information is more readily available. We know more about you than anyone else, on this panel. So one of the things I always say about protecting your digital holdings is actually the weak link is always the person in the mirror or the person, on our screens. Taking the same care that you would do for your most trusted documents, whether it's your passport, your wallet, or the identification that you keep, such as maybe your passwords or biometric information. Treat it the same way. Don't share your passwords like Paul said earlier. And lastly, maybe use reputable licensed companies to conduct your digital transactions. Guys that invest in standards, securities, they don't take shortcuts. They take it slow and methodical. So if someone comes to you online and said, here's a great value proposition, it's so cheap, we undercut the market. They're undercutting for a reason, right? It's too good to be true. It is that way for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, but back to the topic on this. So my mom has a problem. Has two problems. One is remembering all her passwords for all her online stuff. And the other is that day she sent me a SMS, which is like a phishing SMS, telling her to do some transactions in Bitcoin. I open this to you as well as the rest of the guys. Your take on, how do we educate or address the statement that Bitcoins are a scam? I know that now we're in 2020, it's a bit better than like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, maybe I'll start and I'll say maybe I'm shocked that your own mom is phishing you with SMS information. So even if your relatives, if your mom or friends are asking for your Bitcoin, at these prices, I would not let it go. You'll be crazy to let your Bitcoin go at this moment. I mean, I would say at one point, it was a great way to facilitate payments, but with the price volatility and what's happening, I think there's a lot more better alternatives right now to facilitate any payments. So if anyone's asking you, to remit or to transact with Bitcoin, it's probably not going to be true. And also, I would say maybe encourage you, like everyone said on this panel, spend more time knowing who you're dealing with. If it's your mom texting you, give her a call. Going analog doesn't hurt. Great way to verify.
But how about the rest of the guys? How about the other problem about remembering all the passwords of everything? And have you all seen, in terms of experience, how vulnerable are we to being hacked? In terms of the passwords that we hold. I mean, say for like, some of the cases that we read on the public news. Yeah.
I think I can answer this question. So I think a lot of phishing attacks, what they do is some of them, they would launch a simulated banking site like DBS and asks you to input your credentials, right? In the hope that you'll recycle this password somewhere else. So then they'll try on multiple other sites that potentially you might visit. So it's definitely best practice not to recycle passwords, but how do you remember all the passwords, right? So the next thing you can do is rely on a reliable password manager like LastPass or some of these online services, or just write it down physically somewhere and lock it away, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, on top of your password, assume that your password will be breached one day, even not by your own mistake, but by the provider that you're using. The vendor might have been compromised. Even the largest organizations in the world have been compromised despite all the security that they have done. So you should add on 2FA on top of it, and then change your password regularly across the board. I think that's the best way to protect yourself.
Yeah, but that also comes to one point that I wanted to ask maybe Michael first and then Paul. In the work that you do, in the event of a real data loss, and you need to kind of trace back and do some forensic around it, anything interesting based on the number of years that you've done this so far? Any case that pops to your mind?
Yeah, I think what Hing mentioned was quite interesting on writing down. I think one exercise that I always do when I walk into the office is to check whether there's any post-it with password. Sometimes they try to hide the post-it below the mouse mat and then the usual place, right? So you'll be surprised that more often than not, because it's so hard to remember, everyone sort of write it down. But the places that they put is a place that's accessible by anyone which is physically there. And I just read an article recently that says that the average online account that one of us would have now is about 200 accounts. So at any time we have 100 to 200 accounts. And I was thinking that, yeah, actually you could have that much of account. But a lot of times your account are linked together with, let's say, Facebook login or your Google Mail login, right? Or your Google account. So that's also, it's both an advantage and a threat as well, because having everything linked to an account, you don't have to remember it twice, right? But once it's compromised, so it's like a chain reaction. Everything else will be compromised along the chain as well. So that's something you need to manage it, and of course, using password managers are one of the solutions as well, or having multiple accounts, rather than just link to a singular, let's say, Gmail or Facebook account.
So that is on the personal protection part. But what about fintech companies? What are the extra standards we need to take care of in terms of data standards, in terms of cyber risk standards, in order to protect our B2C or B2B customers kind of data? Maybe, or
yeah.
Yeah, I can answer. I think generally, most of the fintechs that are kind of around these days that, have been around maybe the past 8 years are going to be in the cloud. I think it's fairly relevant that most of their information and what they need to secure is going to be there. And that's like their crown jewels, because that's where all their data is going to be stored. Like most of whatever processing they're doing is there. So generally, when we're helping companies sort of secure their infrastructure, we help and focus there. Now, there are multiple ways to get into it, the cloud, their cloud environment and their development environment. But generally, a lot of the mistakes that we see is leaving their tokens out there or losing their credentials through phishing campaigns, as mentioned before. There's some simple stuff that you can do to prevent that, like source code scanners that scan for tokens in your Git or repositories or wherever you're storing your source code. On the account takeover side, there is two-factor authentication, which is very simple, and you'd be very surprised in how many organizations don't have two-factor authentication implemented, and ultimately that reduces your risk significantly. And the other thing is kind of like monitoring and keeping in touch with essentially like who's using what account. And making sure you're not using shared accounts, especially in areas where security and auditing matters. Keeping your logs for a significant amount of time, because most organizations don't detect a breach until 3 to 6 months post the breach. So you need to be thinking about that from a logging and storage perspective, because like if someone does break into your environment and you didn't know about it until recently and it happened 6 months ago, you don't have the logs to support what was taken when, essentially you would then subsequently need to declare that everything was lost because you don't actually know what was lost. So it's very important to be able to segment your cloud environment, plus be able to track in case something does happen, what did happen, right? And be able to show the proof of that, because if they just took usernames, for example, that's much less serious breach than if they took all the information in terms of like ID or whatever it is that you're storing that has to do with financial environments. And the regulators will recognize that you have invested in security and will punish you less. So I think ultimately being able to know what has happened when and who are really important things to think about when sort of investing in the security of your cloud. And of course, this is very relevant for the fintechs.
And definitely, if I could add something a little bit controversial, I would say don't even worry about it. I think passwords are going to be obsolete. Like you said, there's so many different passwords. Every single platform is asking for a different password, and no one can remember this. Either you have to write it down or it gets captured somewhere. In my previous life as a cyber forensics expert, when we were doing investigations, a lot of this information was captured in transit. So even though you kept it hidden, once you enter it in, whether it could be key logged or whether it could be captured, that password will get revealed some way somehow. So no matter what we do, you like Hank said, just assume that you're going to be breached, assume that you're going to be hacked. Use that as the ultimate defense, and use those security points. Use things like segregation of data, segregation of duties. This will limit the results of the attack. So my 2 cents is that passwords are going to go away. You're not going to have to worry about it. So don't even worry.
I'll just add on to what Kenny and Paul just said. So I think, yeah, I think you have to presume the password will be something like Wi-Fi password will get shared around eventually. So it's good to implement some kind of role-based access control even when using cloud services, segregate and give responsibility and take away responsibility when not necessary, not required. Yeah, especially I think recently there's an increase in ransomware attacks against enterprises. So I think the fear a lot of enterprises and companies, fintechs have is the fear of unknown. So you don't know what you've been breached, what has been taken from you. So I think that's the fear that everyone has in mind.
Okay, I think that's really interesting. I would like to allocate some time in case there might be some questions from the audience here. I also received some questions. We received some questions during the registration stage. So one of the questions, any audience, if you have some questions, you can type it in there. That there is a question for the panel is, what would be the best advice to a small company who are looking to protect themselves from cyber risk and hacking? I know we kind of went through that, but I think the intent of this question is, how much really does it cost to actually have minimal kind of security parameters for their solution or for the company?
You can answer some of those. I'll let anyone follow up. Yeah, I think one, it really depends on a couple of things. When you say small, like what does small actually mean, right? Because I think that's part of this. So I'll answer it like in a broad-based spectrum. I think people and process are the areas we're going to get the most bang for your buck, like kind of as I was saying in the beginning. And ultimately it's free outside of course, the time aspect. And that's stuff that can scale with your business and kind of set you up. Another thing that I highly recommend is cyber insurance, because ultimately that is good downside protection for your organization. And it's not going to be expensive if you're a small company, again, depending on what that means and what space you're in. And then I think it depends on what space you're in. So like if you're a tech company, then I would invest in the security of your cloud environment, right? Because ultimately that's where a lot of your sensitive information will be stored. Now, if you're a more traditional company, probably you can get away with a lot of the people and process stuff until you scale to like 50 people. And then I think you start needing to think more about the technology aspects of what you should secure in your business. Of course, there's things like antivirus and stuff that should be basic and it's not really expensive, I think, from an investment perspective. But a lot of the investment that I would be focused on, if you're not a tech company, is on the people and process. And even with the tech companies, you still focus on people and process, but I also think you focus a bit more on technology because you are going to be regulated at some level there. And if you're a regulated business, MAS has done a very good job of outlining the requirements. So, following those requirements, and whether you need to do that with technology or people and process, I think ultimately will be up to you and how you read the policies. But, there are plenty of companies out there that can help you along that journey, and plenty of reasonably priced technology solutions that can help as well. So yeah, I guess it depends, but those are some thoughts around it.
So I think Paul covered a lot of some services. I want to come from a more products perspective. I think the 101 for cybersecurity is always endpoint protection, because when you have employees, you have computers, that's one of the weakest link. We recommend some kind of endpoint protection, antivirus, cloud security, email security. These are the basics.
What about for employees? How do you make it simple for them to understand? What are some like basic, maybe one to three kind of things to take note of when they're working from home?
Well, I think for the employee, the main thing is the awareness. So if they go through some mandatory e-learning, there's now, in fact, a lot of e-learning course is actually very advanced in the sense that it has interaction, Q&A, and sometimes even gamification, So as long as they're aware of the risk of what they should or should not do, I think that will be the first level of defense for the company.
I would add to that, maybe another way to approach it is to get that muscle memory. Back them, expose the information, show what it means to lose something that's very dear to you. Whether it's loss of personal information or the password. If someone's been hacked, that they've been hacked before. They walk around a little bit more gingerly. They ask a lot more questions. But someone who has never been hacked, they're more free flowing. They're more comfortable with transacting online. I would say just expose them to it. Show them what can really happen, and put skin in the game for them.
Okay, I think with that, we come to the end of our session, but I would like to sum it up as for the subcom that we're really excited to actually do more work in this space. And one of the main aims besides awareness and advocacy is we really want to work together with other fintech companies as well as clients in the ecosystem. So in the next couple of weeks, we will actually be sharing more on how we're going to kind of roll out several initiatives, whether is it partnership with other cybersecurity agencies or alliances with other fintech members. We actually share more here. So with that, I will ask Michael first. Is there any concluding words that you want to share before we end off this session?
No, definitely. I think it's well covered in your conclusion. So I think we're just looking forward. It's just the beginning of this, and we're looking forward to work with the stakeholders in the industry.
Okay, so on behalf of SFA Executive Committee, I first like to thank Michael, Kenny, Heng, and Paul for joining us in this panel session and launching this cyber risk subcom with us, as well as SFA Secretariat team and all the audience who joined us here. So feel free to directly connect with us via LinkedIn or via our emails, and I am sure the subcom will be happy to work with you or participate in some of the initiatives that you think might be interesting. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.